Well, good morning, Africa. Good evening or afternoon, Asia. It must be nighttime in North America. Welcome to a dialogue convened by the Institute for Peace and Security Studies, Addis Ababa University. We're going to have an exciting dialogue for the next hour or so that will focus on the journey of civil society organizations and structural prevention, conflict resolution, and maintenance of peace processes in Africa. We're going to reflect on the achievements and the challenges faced by civil society organizations in conflict prevention, management, and post-conflict reconstruction processes in Africa. We are also, as part of this dialogue, we wish to come up with as a deliverable, an output from this practical, operable recommendations to overcome whatever challenges we'll have identified and to facilitate greater and deeper ways in which civil society organizations can carry out their role. And in particular, this conversation about peace and security, about civil society organizations and peace and security in Africa, we'll look at the history of this involvement. It predates the late 1980s, especially in those areas where there were liberation wars, but it was accentuated with the advent of political liberalization. And as you will have seen from the concept note to this meeting, clear indications of how the Constitutive Act of the African Union and the protocol establishing the Peace and Security Council, as well as the statutes of ECOSOC, make provision for greater participation of civil society in the affairs of the African Union. Today, I have an eminent set of panelists who have very practical knowledge of the field, and who also have written extensively on various aspects of the subject matter. They work daily on these issues. We will start our program shortly with opening remarks from the Director of the Institute of Peace and Security Studies, Dr. Jonas Adaye Adeto. We just call him Dr. Jonas. For purposes of this conversation, what we're going to, perhaps as a practical thing that we always do within IPSS dialogues, we will drop titles. I will use the titles to introduce so that at least you know that they are knowledgeable about the subject area. But afterwards, we will try and simplify our interaction. Our panel will have Dr. Trufena Mukuna, who is the Executive Director of the Organization for Social Science Research in Eastern and Southern Africa, Australia. We will also have Ms. Achieng Akena, who is the Executive Director of the International Refugee Rights Initiative, IRRI. We will have Mr. Edmund Yakani, who is the Executive Director of Community Empowerment for Progress Organizations in South Sudan, SEPO, South Sudan. And we'll have Ms. Emebet Getachew, who's the Ethiopia Country Manager of the Life and Peace Institute. And finally, we will have Dr. Martin Rupia, who's a manager and training in innovation and training at the African Center for Constructive Resolution of Disputes, ACCORD. All these speakers have other hats. I have avoided giving long introductions and long CVs. You can find this on the website. There is a saying where we come from that if you make the introduction of a person too long, it is because they are short on substance. Because I've made their introductions short, it means that they are very deep in substance, as you all know. So without much ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Jonas to give us the opening remarks, and we will immediately get into the panel. The agreement with the panel is that they will each have about 5 to 7 minutes, but to frame the issues, and then we will return to each with questions For those of you who wish to ask questions, there are opportunities to post on the chat, and we will also try and make allowances for people to directly ask questions. Just by way of protocol, when you are asking questions, I know that there is a temptation to start off by saying you are grateful for the opportunity. You would like to thank the organizers, because we're going to be giving you just 1 to 1.5 minutes each to ask your questions or make your comment. We will assume that you are grateful to the organizers for the opportunity. We will also assume that you are grateful to the panelists for whatever they will have presented. This is not to alter culture of courtesy. It is simply to make sure we have optimum utilization of time. With those remarks and tone setting regarding protocol, allow me to welcome our host today. But before I do, allow us to thank upfront the IPSS Secretariat for putting together this amazing panel, and also to indicate to those who may have followed some discussion on social media where we misnamed Dr. Martin Rupia. We would like to apologize to Dr. Martin Rupia. We had changed his race and his surname, but he's here in person and he has restored his real name and his race, and apologies for that small typographic error. So I'll start with Dr. Trufena Mukuna, and afterwards Mr. Chieng Akena and Mr. Edmund Yakani, and then Ms. Emebet Getachew, and we'll come to Dr. Rupia after Dr. Jonas has presented. I don't want to be coming back and forth. I want it to flow. We will have a timekeeper so that the speakers at 5 minutes start winding down. Should you require more time, we will make sure it's availed during your second bite. Thank you. Dr. Jonas, our host, kindly give us the opening remarks.
Thank you so very much, Brian, as always, for this extremely stimulating introduction. Thank you again. The protocols have been already in a very civilized manner for civil society, which made us really civil, more civil than ever before, that dropping such as ranks and those protocols so as to make our conversation very informal, informative, imaginative, and innovative. So I can't thank you enough indeed. Thank you very much. So following that very extremely important and smooth introduction, let me go straight to, ladies and gentlemen, welcome you very warmly. Let me thank you so much indeed for honoring us by accepting our invitation and being part of this, particularly presenters. Thank you for sacrificing your time and energy at this extremely demanding time. Particularly COVID has made us economical with our energy as we even speak, and it is so difficult at times we all belong to. So thank you for making all, except irrespective of these all difficulties, making time for this. Thank you. The topic Civil Society Organization in Peace and Security Agenda of Africa reminds me of the time EPRDF, Ethiopian People's Liberation Democratic Front, now no more in power, when it started to come to Ethiopia after overthrowing the Derg. The only place for us, because there is a gap between the previous government and the new government, then the only responsible peacekeepers, conflict preventers, peace builders were the local community services, and they are civil society. We call them Ekob or Idir in Ethiopian local languages. It is they who should go around and take care of schools, markets, and shops so that there would be no plundering or killing of each other. It is so important how civil society at grassroots level, as well as if we remember at the end of Cold War, how solidarity in Poland entirely leads the whole nation to freedoms with Lech Wałęsa's leadership. Civil society not only prevent conflicts, but also they build peace. They also enter into negotiations, and they also facilitate, life as well, particularly when you have civil societies. It indicates sort of guarantee for peace in sort of occasions like the one I have mentioned concerning Ethiopia in early 1990s or 1991, 92, to be honest. So civil societies, when they won Nobel Peace Prize in Tunisia, I was absolutely uplifted to show, the role of civil society, how much they can really make the difference, not simply a difference. When they managed in Kenya election, when they interfere, when they made sort of an orderly path in Ghana 2008. So I can't really finish listing what they have done, how they can really engage in peace and security agenda of Africa. They have these marvelous duties. At the same time, of course, there are some other times where civil society are misconstrued and misunderstood by some governments. I'm sure civil society to me is an indicator of maybe sort of middle class existence, guarantee for democracy and liberty, for living together as well. I'm sure, as already Brian very brilliantly introduced, from these fascinating minds, from the speakers I can see, I know most of them personally as well. We will have more exciting times. So wishing you all excellent engagement and exciting time. I officially declare open that this will start our discussions, and wish you all the best and safest day together. Thank you very much indeed. Brian, I'm done. Over. Hello, Brian. Brian.
Hey, Doctor. Dr. Jonas?
Yes.
Now I can hear you.
Okay. So, can you hear me all? Can I be heard now?
Yes, now you can be heard.
Right, it's quite interesting. I thought I concluded rather than starting, to be honest with you, Brian. So once again, thank you very much for this opportunity. I took some empirical data from Ethiopia to witness how significant civil society organizations are during the transition from military government to Ethiopia's Revolutionary Democratic Party. Ethiopia had, in most parts of Ethiopia, we had no government. So who filled the gap? It was civil society organization. By making law and order, markets and schools and in neighborhoods. The same is true if I take it at higher level in 1989, 1989, 91, 90 in Poland, when you had the solidarity movement. The solidarity leader, Lech Wałęsa, led through civil society, the entire government, the entire society, the entire nation. So civil society has this great role in Africa. Kenyan example, Kenya election 2008, how civil society managed is almost in history's record. The same is true in Ghana and in different parts of the world. The role of civil society really can be emphasized. I can't overemphasize, to be honest. When they were awarded in Tunisia for their duties, Nobel Peace Prize, I was one of the persons who were really uplifted by their activities. I'm expecting more duties, more activities, more engagements and imaginative engagement today in our deliberation and conversation. So wishing us all excellent deliberations and engagements, I declare our virtual discussion is formally open. Brian, can you hear me now?
Thank you, Dr. Jonas. Thank you, colleagues. The
I had to
virtual
replay, to be honest.
is declared open. Dr. Mkuna, over to you. I'm not seeing Dr. Mkuna here. Okay, Dr. Mkuna is now here. Trufina?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Dr. Mkuna, it's you now.
There's noise. I don't know where it is from.
Please go ahead. I think the IT guys will sort it out. It's an echo.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brian and Dr. Johannes, for the very insightful. There's too much echo. I don't. Hello, I would like to be advised on how to proceed so that, because there's too much echo.
Doc, please hold on. Let's see if IT can sort it out.
Yeah.
Normally, it would happen if you had two gadgets open or someone has an open mic.
Yeah.
May I kindly ask everybody that's not speaking to mute their mics?
Yes, I have an echo. I don't know why. Yeah. It's still. What do I do now?
Dr. Mkuna?
Let me move to another room.
Dr. Mkuna?
Yes.
Dr. Mkuna, as
Yes.
you relocate and we try and sort this out, let me ask
Yes,
Achieng.
I'm relocating. Hello? Don't give up on me. I've moved.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brian and Dr. Jonas. I just want to pick up from where you stopped. My God.
Let me suggest an approach. Let's try and sort out your technical bits. Let's see if we'll go to Achieng and then come back to you. Is that okay? Okay. Ms. Achieng Akena, who I've already introduced, will come first, then we'll come back to Dr. Trufena.
Good morning, and thank you, Brian. I hope you can hear me, and I hope I don't also have an echo. So great. This again. I have 5 minutes, and Brian, you did say that we should not. We should do away with the niceties, but I do have to mention that this issue around civil society's role in peace and security is really a very important issue, and one that has had, I think, in my opinion, a lot more challenges, but at the same time has had great achievements despite the challenges. Yes, as you mentioned, the documents of the African Union primarily point to a people-centered Africa, to a continent that is founded on its peoples and meets the aspirations of its peoples. The reality, however, Brian, is more of a continent of governments that are fearful of its own people. And that fear we see resonating quite broadly or translating quite broadly across many African countries in the reduction of civic space, in the reduction of the ability of civil society organizations to operate within their countries or to play a role around issues that are important to the people of Africa. So on one hand, we have the wonderful documents that talk about African peoples participating in the continent and in their countries and contributing to development. But on the other hand, we have national, regional, continental actors who are not committed to such participation or to facilitating such participation. Despite this state of things, civil society organizations have really been able to push boundaries and open several pathways for engagement, despite the curtailing of the spaces in which they operate. And this takes the form of legal, structural, sometimes even physical curtailment of civil society actors and human rights defenders across the continent. But despite that, civil societies, organizations, actors keep, forming pathways, keep navigating the challenges and the structural barriers that have been put into place that prevent them from being effective in their work, and are able to push the peace and security agenda quite remarkably within both national, regional, and continental spaces. And I'll give some examples. At the continental level, for example, civil society was prime in pushing what is called the Livingstone Formula, which is really a mechanism with which civil society organizations are able to brief the Peace and Security Council about circumstances occurring in the countries in which they work. Things for which they have intimate on-the-ground knowledge, and they have been able to utilize this mechanism to provide updates on country situations to various actors, particularly the Peace and Security Council and various embassies based in Addis. Despite this, and despite the number of briefings, and there have been quite a few, that have been given to these actors with the view that they will, take action to push for the resolution of a country situation, we haven't seen that commitment coming from these mechanisms in terms of resolving the challenges, the peace and security challenges that are faced by various countries on this continent. So civil society have invested a lot of time and resources to ensure that, these key actors are informed and involved in issues that are happening in a particular country. But we haven't seen, despite the investment, the resource investment, the time investment, the energies investment, we haven't seen a commiserate engagement by these organizations that have resulted in very concrete actions that match the urgency with which the work is done by civil society. We have also seen civil society actors engaged in peace processes, pushing for peace processes, pushing for transitional justice processes in countries to ensure sustainable peace. And they continue to play these roles despite the fact that our regional and continental actors, as I said, do not provide that concomitant engagement on issues of peace and security. Another good example is on the situation of Burundi, where the Pan-African Lawyers Union engaged the East Africa Legislative Assembly to get some changes to the country a few years ago. And whereas this was novel and innovative in terms of using a mechanism that existed to try and bring attention to a country situation, the hearing was had, but the follow-up action in terms of actually resolving the situation that civil society brought to the East African community, the reaction was not to the level that it could have been. And sometimes as civil society, when we engage these institutions, when we engage these mechanisms with a view to bring about peace and security, there is a strong disappointment when that engagement does not result in the concrete action that is required to save lives and to protect African people. I think my 5 minutes is up, so I'll leave it there and maybe come back in to respond to any questions that may arise for me.
Thank you, Achieng. Civil society has provided early warning, but the responsible bodies have not engaged in early practical action to prevent, and this has led to disappointment, and civil society has pushed for various things from the Livingstone Formula to the AU Transitional Justice Policy Framework. And thank you. Just in keeping with that, Dr. Trifena, we're going to try and come back to you and see if you are now, we've resolved the echo.
But I cannot speak on message. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. You still have an echo. So what I'm going to do is let me move to Edmund Yakani and then try again to come back to you. Please bear with us. I'm quite sure the technical team will find a solution in the meanwhile. Edmund, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hello? Hello?
I think what we'll do now is let's move on to Emebet Getachew. Ms. Emebet, as I told you, is the country manager of the Life and Peace Institute, an avid intellectual and activist. Emebet, thank you. Let's hear Emebet's views on the subject.
Great, thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, IPSS, for inviting me to this panel. I hope you can hear me well. Let me try to, I think Achieng addressed a number of issues, and perhaps if mine sounds repetitive, forgive me for that. But regarding the civil society agenda, especially in influencing peace and security on the continent, perhaps it's better to also classify the different civil society actors. One that is, the traditional civil society, which includes the faith-based organizations, neighborhood cultural associations, elders, etc. We know these communities in our different contexts, and they are to some extent shock absorbers. As such, they tackle localized conflicts, adversaries, natural calamities, and generally can be seen as organic mechanisms for conflict management, post-conflict reconstruction and development, and also I think to some extent conflict prevention. And there is this African-based regional networks, as Achim was mentioning. You have, mainly considered these organizations as NGOs and in traditional sense. In some contexts, they are considered as elite, but still, some of the issues that they prioritize may not necessarily mirror local issues. Sometimes the localization of, peace efforts are difficult, and that's why we have a lot of conversation about localizing peace at the, currently. And these organizations also depend on funding from outside and may find it difficult also to sustain localized peace initiatives. And the other one, the other category of civil society, we call it the international NGOs, like maybe Life and Peace Institute and others, which puts a lot of effort to link up with both regional and local initiatives. They are a bit distant from local issues, but still play their role in similar, similar to the regional NGOs. When we come to peace and security, I think the role of civil society, especially in prevention, remains really weak, in my opinion. And it's only recently that we focus on prevention now. And, it was mainly about response, and civil society is still struggling to manage, to transit from the interventionist agenda to preventionist mode. And I think the reason being, first, the mindset, the mindset that, they are primarily conditioned to intervene but not to prevent, because prevention work is deeply political, and you can go as far as the political space, and will allows you to operate both at national and regional level. And also, I think this is also true for regional economic communities in the African Union, because if you look at, for example, the Peace and Security Department and the political affairs at the AU, it's their roles are really different, and especially the Peace and Security Department looks stronger than the political affairs, because political affairs isn't able to prevent conflicts, and in intervention in prevention, you have to deal or confront root causes of conflicts, such as kind of the governance deficits, the corruption, etc. And in contrary, if you look at the work of peace and security, you have prevention, but most of the time the focus is on response. So we have early warning systems, but early warning doesn't mean, or necessarily doesn't mean to prevent conflicts. I think regarding the achievements, of course, at the AU level or RICS level, we have beautiful instruments. I think we have abundant resource to apply in terms of the instruments. I think there's no deficit in that, but I think in terms of applying them and implementing them, we've always talked about, there is lack of applicability, or in practice, they remain still behind. But looking at the achievements of civil society, I think what they, across the board, especially on the continent, what they managed to do is to, first create awareness on different issues, big or small, continental, regional, national. So they remain to be very active in raising awareness. There is also, in my opinion, in our different contexts, I think the resilience and survival is a very, very important issue for civil society, because some civil societies still try to exist and exist as well in a difficult and volatile context. And they manage to promote issues that matter to them and also to their communities, despite high risks. And also, I think in the age of social media, it has also created this vibrancy of using the virtual space for civil society to connect and mobilize for cross-cutting issues. You've seen, for example, the Bring Back Our Girls movement in Nigeria, and different movements, I think, created on social media. And I think in terms of grassroots civil society, they still play an active role, especially in peace building. And also, I think, though not sufficient, they collaborate with regional economic communities, the African Union, especially in early warning systems. And I think the AU has also benefited from that. We also see civil society, their increased engagement in peace processes and in participation in political transitions. You can see that in Sudan and to some extent, at least in Ethiopia, especially in the Horn of Africa. And I think, of course, the regions are different. I think in West Africa, it's extremely vibrant. And also, I think we see partnerships emerging, especially between AU and civil society recently, especially now on the topics like silencing the guns, Agenda 2063, the AU gender strategy. This remain to be a little bit open and participatory of, bringing civil society. And I think the big opportunity that comes with the SAFTA, I think that's a new frontier and could potentially unlock the demographic dividends and economic-led civil society collaboration. I think when I talk of or bring the issue of challenge or the challenges that civil society face, I think just there are overall challenges that I would like to mention. This is that emerges from the state of the world itself. I think the first being, the false promise, and I'm sorry to say this, the false promise of liberal democracy. This. You can hold your governments accountable, but then you have so many complicated issues that civil society cannot control or cannot influence on. And you have this complex nature of conflicts. And in every conflict, we do miss the big, power picture, casting, for example, conflicts as internal issues. There's no proper reporting on actual arms flows, and also covert operations. And there is actual regional and proxy aspects to conflicts. These are transnational complexities, beyond the reach of civil society, especially when civil society cannot come together and do the proper analysis. And there is also big challenge related to populism and the growing state-centric views, which is protectionism of the state, as well as the question of sovereignty, despite rampant government or crackdown and governance deficits, disputed elections as triggers of conflict, and also failure in managing diversity. But then when we come to civil society own issues or challenges, I divide them into two. One being the internal issues, looking at, for example, internal competition between grassroots versus, for example, elite, civil society. Grassroots civil society at times, they feel they are overlooked, and this recognition and respect gap is there. And growing polarization, political polarization of civil society as well, as a barrier to build common ground and to speak on issues based on shared values and principles. And I think regionally, there is, I think I stand corrected, but there is the declining solidarity on, issues to speak on. For example, you have different crises emerging, but then we don't speak on them. For example, you have Cameroon, you have Mozambique, in other contexts. And then I think when we look at the external threats for civil society, I think the space is always remains a big challenge. And at the AU level, for example, how many open sessions are there with briefing from civil society? The Peace and Security Council has again, forgive me to say this, been ineffective to prevent and manage conflicts. And now I think within the space, there is lack of even interest to engage with the Peace and Security Council, given that the decisions are not implemented, are not followed up. And then you have this lack of enabling environment, as politics determines again the ability for civil society to work or not to work. And then there is also lack of sustainability of funding through conflict cycles, because for example, peace building is not. Sorry, I should stop here maybe.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Amy. And I feel guilty having to stop you. My lecture at law school used to say,
I thought I should speak for 15 minutes, but I think it's okay.
No. It was 5 minutes each.
Okay.
My lecturer at law school used to say, each time I did what I've just done to you, young man, don't interrupt the flow of wisdom. I'm sorry to be interrupting the flow of wisdom.
It's all right. Thank you.
This brings me back to Dr. Trufena. Let's try it one more time.
Hello.
Hear you clearly now without an echo.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry about that challenge. I want to support. I want to just concur with and thank all the previous speakers who have spoken some of the issues that I was going to talk about. Mine, I will concentrate on the achievements, the achievements that civil society organizations have made on the continent, especially in the Eastern and the Lake region, and also the challenges that they are facing. And then I have one main recommendation to make. Civil society organizations are very critical to governance because they localize governance. They have made it possible for the communities to come to the table. They amplify the voices of the voiceless and make it possible for the communities to also participate in decision making at the table. But this is dependent on if they are given the space by the governments. And therefore, as we converse about this, it is important to consider pushing for space for them in the constitutions of the various governments, so that they can be part of, they can localize governance and continue doing the good work that they are doing. In regards to conflict transformation, they have been instrumental in the proper management of conflict, because conflict is part of life, and they help they help very much in conflicting areas so that conflict does not degenerate into violence. Because they invite various stakeholders to the table to negotiate. They come up with alternative conflict resolution mechanisms. And we have seen this in various cases, like what has happened among the pastoralists, for example, when they conflict over natural resources. We have seen this happening in regards where we are having conflicts in regard to religion, and they come together and discuss the root causes and solve these problems. They also promote the development of institutional changes, like advocating for security sector reforms, economic sector reforms, judicial reforms. And we have seen these happening, especially in Kenya. They were very instrumental in the development of the new constitution of 2010 that is largely human, that takes the human rights approach. In as much as it may be having other challenges as usual, but then at least they have made institutions strong. is the other challenges that this constitution has are affected by informal mechanisms. But the formal mechanisms, the civil society organizations have been very strong. This also happened in Rwanda. After post-genocide, the women organized themselves in civil society organizations and made sure that Rwanda became a government. They helped in the construction of the new government, because mainly the men had died and they had fled into exile. So the women were very instrumental in Rwanda in putting together the new government and institutions. Another achievement of civil society organization is social accountability. In as much as social accountability is weak on the continent, but we have seen that due to the diversity or the diverse nature of the civil society organizations, they have managed to put the government on check. They have managed to put the government on check in terms of creating awareness and also making the government to go back to the policies and budgets that they put in place to make sure that they provide social services. So, for example, we have seen this happening in Kenya. Also, I can give the example of Kenya, where they, after post-election violence, they were instrumental in advocating for the resettlement of the victims and the compensation of the victims. In as much as this has not been done 100%, but at least their work and voice has been seen there. In northern Uganda, civil society organizations have been very instrumental in peace building. They have helped to institutionalize the culture of peace in northern Uganda after the LRA war, and many of them participated they were very instrumental in rehabilitating the communities, rehabilitating the ex-combatants, welcoming them back. Many of the children did not have anybody to welcome back, or the women who abducted. The civil society organizations performed these rituals for them. They also participated in disarmament and encouraging the youth and these women to surrender. They helped reconciling families. They were also de-oathing them and training them on post-trauma. They also have been very instrumental in poverty reduction by encouraging the donors to give them income generating activities so that they can settle back in the community. So this is northern Uganda particularly is one of the areas where we have seen this happen. They facilitate dialogue between communities and the government, so that they help the government to get buy-in. First of all, they make the community to own the problem that may be there, and also negotiate for the government to have buy-in. This partnership has been very instrumental in most places where we are having conflict, especially on the continent right now, where we are having the youth fighting with the police all the time. In a study that we just concluded in the IGAD region on youth and violent extremism, we saw how the civil society organizations have been very instrumental in making peace between the communities and the police. Also, they have been instrumental in service delivery, providing humanitarian action and the protection of the civilians. This has been observed on the whole continent. In most cases, they have really supported people who are fleeing, or those who are, they have built shelters for them and supported and settled communities and provided services like schools, food, shelter, and the like. We have also seen them in the management and access of natural resources, especially among the pastoralist communities, and they do this in a culture-sensitive way. We find that all conflicts are context-specific, and therefore the culture, in as much as we would like to bring peace on the continent, we must consider that culture matters. Everything about peace and security is culture sensitive and gender responsive. They promote cross-community relations as a conflict resolution mechanism for lasting peace. This has happened almost everywhere where there are any conflicts. They have also supported in justice seeking by institutionalizing the justice system and retribution, the deterrence of rehabilitation, restoration, and condemnation of social status or social solidarity. They promote human rights. We have seen in most cases, it is the civil society organizations that work with Transparency International, that work with other bodies, international bodies, and they flag out the problems that communities or persons who are handicapped are affected. Generally, someone talked about, disagreed with them. I think it was Acheng who said that they have not been instrumental in prevention programming, but for me, in the research which we just concluded on youth and violent extremism, we found that civil society organizations have reorganized themselves in very special ways. They have created awareness. They are de-radicalizing the youth, they are rehabilitating them, they are doing capacity building on policy engagement. They are the ones who are holding community debates, building counter narratives, and even building community trust. And therefore, from my part, on my part, I would like to say that they are very instrumental, because this interfaith dialogue that we are having on the continent presently in regard to violent extremism is very much spearheaded by the civil society organization. So they have taken a whole society approach to preventing and countering violent extremism, and they partner with the governments to do this. We have seen that happening, and we have evidence of that we've documented. In regards to the challenges, there are challenges. Hello, Brian.
Yeah, I will give you a minute to wind out. Yeah. Yes,
for challenges, the main challenge has been funding, suspicion, diversity, and duplication of issues, and also the shrinking civic space on the continent. However, on our part, we have, the research that we conducted, we found out that if we harness the synergies between the formal and informal mechanisms, whereby we strengthen the partnerships between the government and the civil society organizations, then civil society organizations emerge as a very great contributing factor to peace building on the continent. Thank you.
Doc, I wanted you to you said you had one recommendation. I'm curious.
The recommendation that that I have is there should be a strong partnership. Governments should provide space for civil society organizations to forge partnerships. And these strong partnerships will will now harness the synergy between the informal and formal mechanisms of peace building. That is my recommendation.
Thank you so much. That leaves us with the last speaker. If my brother from another mother is not yet here, from South Sudan, I'll ask Dr. Martin Rupia to share his views. Then I'll come back to each of the speakers and then open up the floor.
Thank you, Brian. And without much further ado, I would like to begin my 5 minutes focused on evaluating what is referred to as the end of term report 2017-2021, Building the African We Want 2063. This report was submitted by the new team at the African Union that took over in February. And my focus is to see to what extent in that report the role of CSOs in peace and security has been captured in the last 4 years, and also to what extent is the role of CSOs been thought through, been integrated, been part of policy making going forward in the next at least 4 years during their term. The key point is to accept that not only do we see important manifestations of conflict on the African continent, and for me it is, for one reason, is simply to look at the numbers of refugees and internally displaced. The African continent continues to register an increasing number of refugees and IDPs. And that is, of course, an outcome of the instability of a number of African states. In that, we also must be aware that the initiative of silencing the guns by 2020 is a process in which, in ideal conditions, CSOs can only participate when the guns have fallen silent. Now, when the guns have not fallen silent, you see civil society groups participating and playing a role, and one is therefore looking at the African Union, the relationship between CSOs and the Secretariat, and of course member states, as to what extent can we integrate and relate to see that the power and potential of civil society groups is harnessed towards stabilization and peace building, on the African continent going forward. My colleague, in the remarks that they made, before me, were, relating to what they called the root causes of conflict. Now, in many cases, when you talk about the root causes of conflict, you are talking about survival and, the political economy, of citizens. And that is where you find a major role played by, civil society groups. And remember, civil society groups include not only civil society workers, churches, other community, groups, professional groups, outside state structures, etc. And they continue to play a role in consolidating what we have seen as, fragile the African state. And so in going forward, I think one of the key recommendations we want to put on the table is to what extent can we be part of the next 4-year, agenda in terms of collaborative planning, going forward. The major conflicts that we have witnessed, on the continent rather, many of them are in fact centered around, elections, political transitions, and agreements in terms of state power, and it is in that context that your civil society groups, the space sometimes, is shrinking and not necessarily, opening up. My colleague Mukuna just now was making reference to the conflicts in Kenya, for example. To that extent, we have seen that every country going to elections tends to get into some sense of tension and in a sense, instability. And if one looks at the electoral calendar for the African continent, for example, you have more than 20 or to 22 elections of different sorts, local government, National Assembly or presidential, that are scheduled for 2021. For me, that is a platform, for civil society groups to look and see how we can collaboratively work with the African Union, but of course with the member states, to see how we can begin to bring nations together, not only before the election that may have been scheduled in country X, but also during the event itself, and of course, the post-conflict and reconstruction. So the key recommendation I make, Brian, in concluding, is that to what extent a CSO been included in the planning by the African Union going forward, if we take as the opening shot the end of term report 2017 and 2021.
Thank you, colleagues. So let's walk back. Let's start with Achieng. You by default became the first. In fact, we are allowed to breach protocol because Edmund is not here. I will have a question for Dr. Jonas. Dr. Jonas, when you are looking, I will ask questions to everybody and then you can all answer one after the other. Dr. Jonas, when you are looking at the emergence of solidarity movements, of movements engaged in violence monitoring, of human rights movements that are engaged in monitoring the violation of rights, of movements that are engaged in seeking redress, whether post-elections or post-extreme repression or war, movements such as you mentioned in Tunisia. How and where do you locate the role of academics or knowledge, and how and where do you locate the role of young people, not just as activists? And then I'll come to Trafina. Trafina, you gave a whole biography around the achievements with respect to civic space, conflict transformation, advocacy for reforms, including security sector, judiciary, and so on and so forth. And you looked at Rwanda post-genocide and maybe Congo and Sierra Leone and Liberia during the conflicts. You looked at social accountability, especially the resettlement within Kenya following the 2007 post-election violence. You looked at the peace-building efforts of CSOs in northern Uganda and the broader Great Lakes, and how they were engaged in reintegration and rehabilitation of children and women, the de-authing, the disarmament, and the reconciliation processes. You made reference to dialogue between communities and government and specific humanitarian action and protection of civilians, whether they be IDPs and refugees, and largely the role of CSOs in redress, in protecting human rights, creating awareness, including what you call prevention, which is de-radicalization, building counter-narratives, community trust, and so on and so forth. In your view, what has been the role of culture, of tradition, of local knowledge, including traditional authorities, and the relationships between civil society, faith, and traditional leadership? And to what extent is this a factor in reimagining the engagement between civil society, the state, and the African Union? The idea of indigenous or homegrown solutions, such as you saw in Rwanda with Gachacha and so on and so forth. Emebet, you walked us through the classification of civil society, traditional civil society, the organic mechanisms as you referred to them, and the Africa-based regional networks, which are sometimes seen as elite, but that work to localize peace accords, but get funding from outside. And you looked at INGOs linking up with regional and local, but maybe somewhat disconnected from local issues. You looked at the role in terms of prevention. Your sense was that CSO's mindset is still geared towards the interventionist agenda, which in part may be donor-driven, as opposed to the preventionist mood. I know that you and Trofina don't fully agree on this, but your point was that prevention work is deeply political, and because it has to address itself to the root causes. And in this, you looked at the structure and orientation of the political, the Peace and Security Department and Political Affairs Department at the African Union, and one would argue within the REX that they are not sufficiently structured to actually deal with the root causes, although they have normative frameworks on them. And you observed something that I think Martin Rupia has been involved in, that early warning is not the same as prevention, that though there's been success in terms of norm building, norm implementation or application has been weak. You raise the issue of virtual space vibrancy and how grassroots civil society is more and more becoming a part of a relevant solution. And this partnership between AU and CSOs and the opportunities of the AFCFTA, silencing the guns, and Agenda 2063. You say many other things, but my question to you is, when you are looking at the CSO grassroots versus elite CSOs, and also what are the dangers of usurpation of voice or displacement of the local by the INGO and the international, as you reflect on what you call the growing polarization? And the second question is, what might be done to strengthen what you refer to as declining solidarity across issues and across themes? And what role might both the AU, states, and INGOs, as well as other actors, play in strengthening such solidarity? What are those practical actions? Achieng, you referred us, and you worked specifically with IDPs and refugees, and in your previous incarnation, you spent half your time trying to get citizens heard at the African Union. You noted the pushing the boundaries of that civil society has done, whether these are legal, structural, physical, but also how the curtailment of civil society, whether it's abduction and torture, arrests, is also legal, structural, and physical. You noted the successes and similar to your colleagues. I want to ask, given the experience of organizations such as PALU in engaging the Burundi situation and the disappointments, and given your own experience in your current work in dealing with what Dr. Martin Rupia has said is the increasing number of IDPs and refugees, what are we not getting right? And what must we do? By we, I mean civil society, the African Union, and the regional economic communities, as well as the international community. The normative frameworks are there. The communiques and declarations are there. What are we not doing right? Finally, I think that Dr. Martin Rupia, you've made a proposal around the two premier things, which are the end of term report, Building the Africa We Want, and situating the role of CSOs in the reforming African Union, where the Political Affairs and Peace and Security Department will merge, where the Political Affairs function will focus on preventive diplomacy. What might preventive diplomacy look like, and what would be the role of CSOs, whether it's mediation and other things, and also what might be the imperatives in the new AU plan, where CSOs have a real chance of not only influencing, but playing a role in terms of changing narrative and changing attitudes of those that are running Africa. I will ask you to take a minute or so to answer those questions from me, then we'll open up to the floor. We're going to start. Actually, we can start. I see that Edmund has come. We're going to start with Trufina, then go to Emebet, then Achieng, and end with Martin. In that order, please go ahead. Yeah. And then I'm going to just give you just one little bit for you to say anything that you didn't get to say, but please then don't take too long.
Thank you, Brian. You were asking about the homegrown solutions and how AU can ensure this is done, particularly looking at the role of the culture, local knowledge, and traditional society. I will again go back to my experience in the research that I've been conducting on the continent in as far as this is concerned. And we found out that unless peace building is localized, then it means nothing. And the African Union, they have mainly lit the spotlight on governments, nationals, but peace and security, it should have a human rights face. It should take a human rights face, and therefore look at it in terms of the impact on the individual, the household, the community, and then now the national perspectives. When we do that, then now that's when we localize it and we use the bottom-up approach in solving the problems. The AU should consider localizing it, using civil society organizations as the gatekeepers. They're the gatekeepers to the communities that they would like to meet and see. Because as I've said earlier on, they amplify the voices of the voiceless. They are the ones who sit at the decision-making tables with the governments. And so if we use this bottom-up approach and the whole society, whole government approach, then it will be possible for us to bring in culture. Now, if we do not, because peace and security should be context-specific and should we should be gender responsive. If we do not factor in culture, we go wrong. There are cultural leaders who have a lot of power, and when they speak to the communities, communities listen. We have seen this in areas where we have kingdoms and the like. Now, if a government just speaks to the people, and especially on matters of land, natural resources, and the like, we saw that in northern Uganda. The cultural leader has more power than the government, which they refer to as being living in Uganda, in Kampala. But the cultural leader lives with them in Acholi land, and when he speaks, they listen. When he says cease fire, they cease fire. Also, culture is important because it leads to us looking at the gender norms. These gender norms have and stereotypes have also been misconstrued. So when we are looking at peace building programming, we must make it gender responsive, gender sensitive. Otherwise, we will still be promoting patriarchy and feminism and the like, which are not very helpful in programming. We must factor in gender so that we take care of the systemic barriers that are that bar women and men to be involved in peace building and bring out their best potential. Thank you.
Colleagues, as the rest of you answer, you are free to disagree with your fellow panelists. You are free to answer a question that I asked somebody else that I had not asked you, if you should think that the question I asked you was too boring. Emabet?
Yes, Brian, can you hear me? Okay. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, Emabet.
Yes, okay, great. Thanks, Brian. You raised important questions regarding the civil society, the grassroots and elite level. I think the distinction is not necessarily a bad thing, but like you said, that what are the dangers? The dangers being if you displace local knowledge, it means you displace, the most important element of, especially from conflict prevention angle, you displace that knowledge. And I think looking at the local expertise, especially looking, the geographic proximity is important, the intelligence, the cultural knowledge, the society at the local level have, local expertise, and, they have legitimacy as well. And the more you work with local NGOs, I mean, especially local expertise, you have, the leverage or the advantage of working in collaboration with them on issues that matter most to the communities. So this is a very important topic. I think the collaboration needs to be harnessed, and I know that sometimes there is resource competition, but then important to emphasize on local knowledge and how we build on the local mechanisms that exist. Because oftentimes, at least in my work, what I've witnessed is that there are a number of local knowledge expertise available, and most of them don't even know there are resources, there are networks, connections that they can apply to their own context. And I think there is that gap that needs to be bridged, in my opinion, that even at national level, NGOs have to be, partnering with local knowledge, and especially the expertise that they bring. And when you talk of I think the AU NGOs and other actors, how they can fix the deficit in solidarity that we see, in my opinion, I think you start with core principles. I think yes, there are so many dividing issues on the continent, in the region, at national level, but then what are the core principles that, or the shared values as human beings are one, but also as civil society, what are the things that bring us together, would be, I think, a starting point. And how do we build the relationship based on that? Of course, there is polarization, deep mistrust created by a political elite, but then, I think there needs to be, like I said, the guiding principle should be the working or emphasizing on the core principles. And I think the first issue also, from at least from the AU side, is to how do they prioritize working with, again, back to local organizations, and because most of the time political problems are local, and how do these big institutions start to listen, listen and prioritize issues that are at the grassroots level. And I think if we look at, for example, one practical step is to look back or see the representation at the ECOSOC, the civil society body that represents all organizations, civil society organizations at the AU level. And if you see representation there, how many local organizations are there, and vis-a-vis other organizations? And I think this has to be perhaps one starting point, and see whether, especially looking at even at REX level, how many of them are represented there. And I think that needs to be a little bit investigated and looked a little bit deeper, and that perhaps the starting point could be there. And I think just maybe on the prevention angle to look at, I think earlier, I think it was mentioned that yes, a lot of actors, especially civil society, are working on prevention. Yes, that's it's an emerging. I think it's being shaped at the moment. But looking at, for example, the prevention, I think there are three commitment issues that we need to raise. I think one, in terms of money, funding, how much is going to, for example, prevention as opposed to intervention. Like for example, look at the AU peace and security and peace operations and looking at, for example, counter violent extremism. How much money is going to those issues rather than looking at structural or working on structural issues. And I think also the leadership effort in this context is really, really important. I hope I addressed your questions, Brian, but
yes, I think you have. Achieng, I need you to deal with Edmund later on. So I'm going to ask Edmund. Edmund, unfortunately, we won't have the benefit of a speech from you, but you've heard the questions that I've asked your colleagues. You are free to take any of them and add any other. And I will give you just 3.5 minutes to either answer questions or make very poignant recommendations or maybe challenges that we've not raised. Yeah, thanks, Edmund.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. With 3 minutes, I would like to be more solution-oriented, Brian. I think with regards to solution and the way forward, Brian, I want to be more practical. One angle practical is what my sister Emebeb have just touched about ECOSOC. I think ECOSOC is the only instrument that if we want to localize peace process and want to see civil society playing a practical and affordable or playing something that can contribute to peace and security of AU, as civil society is concerned, is ECOSOC have to be as a simple process, its membership. And actually, I would recommend that wherever there's an AU mission, ECOSOC should be attached to it. Because ECOSOC is a very good instrument for civil society partnership with AU Peace and Security Council, but it is more political, more expensive, and it's very hard to get the grassroots-based civil society to set an agenda on AU peace and security. So that's one thing I like to put as a way forward that we're going to get. For example, Brian, I've been asking myself that intercommunal violence become a continental issue. South Sudan, Niger, Chad, Central Africa, Cameroon, everywhere, almost 50% of the continent is facing intercommunal violence as a new trend of claiming lives and properties of Africans. But AU have never ever one day sat down at level of Peace and Security Council to discuss what can we do with intercommunal violence which have no direct link with intergovernmental linkages. And I think the board that would have been practical, whether preventive or protection, is ECOSOC. But ECOSOC is very expensive. So I would recommend in this meeting highlight we need to open a discussion around ECOSOC. How can it be simple for grassroots civil society to take off it and to use it as an instrument of setting an agenda that's based, and I agree with my sister who was spoken before, without localizing peace building, forget about it, because if AU operate from the concept of intergovernmental linkages, that will not help. That's first thing I'll let set up, Brian. The second I would set up is that AU Peace and Security Council need to also adapt a formula where they can hear from the civil society. I know we've been trying in the past. We can organize sessions, but sometimes those sessions are not taken serious by AU Peace and Security Council. So the Directorate of Peace Building and the Directorate of whatever conflict resolution in AU Peace and Security Council need to create a platform where civil society of Africa, that grassroots, can speak to the leaders prior, for example, whether summit, would have been ordinary summit, in a way that those discussions are policy centered and they can be taken serious to inform the decisions of our leaders. Because sometimes we have this gallery business around AU headquarters and they don't make any impact. Our leaders throw them away because they have their businesses. So I think that's one thing I'd like to say in terms of the way forward. The other thing is that the AU early warning system, from preventive point of view, the AU early warning system requires an investment, and I really advocate that it should be decentralized. I've been working with the early warning system in terms of we need to start seeing how can we at a grassroots level mitigate problems before we go with it to Addis. And that's where the early warning system work. And that's where I do agree with MFF. We need to check to what level is civil society, the grassroots one, is really driving an agenda of peace and security in the continent. And how do we silence guns by only having conference in Addis, but not silencing guns in the way how the flow of guns and bullets are going to the hands of our citizens, which is very far from Addis. So I'll post that also as an argument that I will answer to. So in conclusion, I would like to say the best way out of this meeting, we can shape African civil society to play a very remarkable and instrumental role in peace and security, in the sense that we also have a solidarity entity that can quickly mobilize the African civil society from perspective of Pan-Africans. So we don't wait. No, Brian, I'm asking myself, when we say African solution to African problems, can we add something to that? Can we say African solution to African problems with African money? Because you can't really set a peace and security, and if your funding source is foreign-based, is not national-based. It's the same thing with civil society. Civil society at a grassroots level will never drive peace and agenda of the continent if our connection to AU Peace and Security Council is too political, too expensive, and our leaders throw it away. And that's, for me, really my point, that if asking me what is my single outcome I want to find from this meeting that can take it further, is ECOSOC must be open up for discussion and should be really domesticated in a way that grassroots civil society of Africa can go. These conditions which are put like for specific class of civil society in the continent should be avoided and should be open up. Thank you very much, Brian. Because of time, I don't take long. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmund. African solutions to African problems with African money. Yeah. Achieng?
Thank you, Brian. I think from where Edmund left off, I think that there is a perception that, and I'm talking particularly about African civil society, that it somehow fell from Mars into a country that is having issues and therefore needs to be somehow isolated from the issues that the country is facing. I think that this is a fallacy. I think that if a civil society organization has grown organically within a country, it will inevitably be experiencing the challenges that that country is facing. So if that country has 60 to 80 to 90% of its budget funded externally, the civil society organization will have its budget funded externally. There's a perception that civil society needs to be perfect in countries that are primarily dysfunctional. And I think that is a particular problem, that when civil society organizations are not perfect, those imperfections are used to disqualify and demerit the organizations. Whereas our governments are equally dysfunctional, but none of that dysfunction is ever used as a demerit for the government. But it is used by government sides to say, no, you cannot participate because you're foreign funded. But our governments are foreign funded. So if our governments are getting money externally, I'm not sure where civil society organizations are supposed to get their funding from. If a country is politically polarized and the civil society exists within that country, there will be polarization within civil society. It is inevitable because it's not this organization is not coming from Mars and landing in a country and then suddenly they're completely neutral and blind to everything that is happening within that context. And I think one of my major recommendations is that there needs to be a realistic reckoning by governments about civil society and a realistic conversation. These blanket rhetorics about foreign funding and so forth and so on, in my experience, they're just used for, I don't want to use derogatory terms, but they're just used to dismiss civil society organizations and the work civil society organizations are doing. And yet, civil society organizations play a critical role in every country, sealing gaps in the social contract, whether it's health, education, things that government is supposed to provide. Civil society is there providing band-aids to help governments that have several loopholes in their service provision to their country, to their people. your question to me, Brian, was in relation to, given my experience, you know, what would I say we're not getting right, given the fact that we're also having increasing numbers of IDPs and refugees, which is really just a reflection. I think it's Martin who made reference to it, of the increasing conflict on the continent. So what is it that we are not doing right? First and foremost, I would say prioritization and consistency. We do not have a priority on the things that matter in this country. Even when we talk about, you know, I really liked Edmund's reference to African, you know, solutions for African problems with African money. There is African money. It's just not going towards African problems. It's going towards, it's misappropriated into other spaces where it is, you know, it's going into people's pockets. It's going into, you know, how many leaders have been found with millions of dollars in their bankers and special houses after being, you know, removed from power. And this is the problem. And I think that in as much as we continue to face the consequences of colonization, there is also, I think African governments continue to deprioritize their citizens at their own risk. People who are not listened to, after a while, it becomes a peace and security issue. And that is what we've seen happening repeatedly across the globe. As people are systematically ignored and impoverished, as we say in my language, punda imechoka, which means the donkey is tired. And we can see that also happening across the continent. People are tired. And so there's popular support for change. And there's popular support. We see so many uprisings happening, particularly amongst young people who are feeling who experience rather the vagaries of our dysfunctional countries much more than anybody does. And we see they're saying they've had enough. They want change. They want to move to other places. And as we continue to ignore these, we start seeing greater and greater pockets of instability in those countries, where, you know, discontent and demands for change are being ignored. I would say the other thing that is that we're doing wrong is that our countries continue to be run like personal properties of the people who are in charge. There is no servant leadership, and most of all, there is no focus on the people. You know, people are only there within 4 or 5 years when it's election time. We remember that there are people. We go out and give, you know, give mega handouts to people for they elect you again, and then you forget them until another 4 to 5 years that comes again. That is that really is a part of what we are doing wrong. My recommendations is first and foremost, I doubt that the solutions to the challenges we face on this continent lie within instruments and mechanisms. I think that has spoken for itself. We have a lot of mechanisms, a lot of instruments, but we still don't have peace, stability, and you know, what is the expression in Agenda 2063? A peaceful, sorry, it's escaped me right now, but we still don't have whatever it is we're wishing for in 50 years. I'm not sure that we will be able to achieve it in 50 years. If we're unable to silence the guns by 2020, I wonder if we'll be able to, you know, achieve a unified and peaceful continent by 2053. And certainly not if we continue doing things the way that we're doing them. Something has to give. At the end of the day, something has to give, and it has to give at a political level. And if it doesn't give at a political level, then we're going to see a lot more uprisings on the continent with Africans who are just discontent with the way things are happening. I think we need to have a meeting of rubber to road when it comes to the commitments that African governments make. And when it comes to citizen participation. You know, as I said, civil society is not perfect, but there are things that are being done. There are Okay, I'm finishing. It's the last point. There are things that are being done. There are actions that are being taken. There are changes that are being made at a small scale, at a large scale, at policy level, at national levels. And I think that needs to be properly acknowledged for what it is.
Thank you so much, Martin.
Thanks, Brian. And I want to acknowledge Edmund has not failed us to challenge us African solutions, African problems, and African money. And of course, Akena, I like your analogy of a tired donkey. One of the points I think that benefits all of us in terms of this discussion is to begin to identify one or two key issues that face the continent around which CSOs must begin to play a role. And for me, to that extent, is the youth bulge, unemployment. This is an issue that is around us, but that does not appear to be ceasing and to becoming part of the central debates and the narratives. And yet, clearly we have, this huge development. Remember, when you are talking about CSOs, in my view, I'm also about, talking about the constituency of the diaspora. So, Brian, in terms of the CSOs on the African continent, we want to draw into account the role and function of, Africans in the diaspora. Many of them will see young people on boats trying to abandon and leave the continent. And they must be part of the debate. How do we address the whole idea around youth unemployment and the youth bulge that is, confronting us? Now, particularly to the question that you presented to me, one of the things that I think we need to begin to work towards in closing the gap of collaboration is to work very closely with the mediation support units, both at the African Union level and in the sub-regions. These are structures that are in place, but I don't think they've created sufficient mechanisms for CSOs to engage and to play a role. Going forward, I would make a strong recommendation for the role of CSOs to become part, of the mediation support unit. And to that extent, it's important to see the role of CSOs being strongly and central in the mediation, negotiations, and stabilization. Remember what we said, when the guns are still firing before they are silenced, it is not the role where CSOs, play, a part. Governments and other players must then reach a ceasefire. And once that is done, then the CSOs may play a role. So intercommunal, violence, I think, again, is an area that had escaped many of us, but we are seeing the growing nature of that phenomena. And to the extent that we have not paid sufficient attention, we must also thank, Edmund for drawing our attention towards that. So with those few words, Brian, as I said, I have to leave because I have another engagement, but I really thank you for the opportunity to make some remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Dr. Apia. Colleagues, we have some questions in this, in the chat. And the one that I've seen in the chat, so I would like to open it up to those attending the meeting. I would like the panelists to note the following. Adane asked the question, what is the difference? What is differences and contributions of international NGOs, local NGOs, and civil society, local civil society? What does what do you mean by traditional civil society? Where's the place of religious institutions? Says okay, says to Mrs. to Chieng. So most of the time, the access for CSOs is a challenging one. People may look for good justification to let them in, but it is better to make previous legal and administrative arrangement to make it easy for CSOs. And then Adane also says CSOs are a challenge or blessings for governments in Africa, and why? Are CSOs a challenge? Ibrahim Mohammed says, my comments to Achieng. So, oh, sorry, I think I'm reading this. I don't know why it keeps coming up. Achieng, this was Edmund, I agree with you. And when our leaders say African solution to African problems, they should also add African resolutions. African resources. Anyway, so we're open. We will open for the next 15 or so minutes. We will take questions. Please indicate if you wish to ask questions. And if to the technical team there have been any questions that have come, let's also look at those questions. The floor is open for questions. Please indicate if you wish to ask questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands at the moment. I assume that some will come. There's a request, Doctor. I have 3 requests. I'll start with Abdi Fattah Habani and Ibrahim Mohammed and Dr. Laid Zaglami. Colleagues, like I said, just 1 minute to 2 minutes, not more. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Because really, I get benefit from this session, and thank you for letting me in. I think my first comments went to Dr. Akina, and we just talked about the accessibility and the acceptance of the CEOs in the field. We see sometimes we find males that are challenging to get in, and yet the legal access is not allowing them to get in. And the other comments is that there are so many and overlapping in the responsibilities. I think we need to find a way how to make it easy for them to get in, and again to make it easy for them either to work together or to leave the best work for the best one to do it. Yes, I'm talking about myself as a practitioner. I'm from Sudan, and I have those challenges. Every time when we lead a function concerning these settlements of conflicts, I say we will solve those challenges. I think those 2 points are very important. I saw Ropia touch a bit on the first concern, but yet it will go to Akina to make more highlights. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Then the next one, Dr. Laid.
Good morning, Brian. Good morning, everyone. I'm calling from Algeria. I'm really interested, and I have been enjoying listening to all the speakers. What I want to say, I feel like a little bit amazed. Why still we have, when we think, why don't we think African spirit? I mean, I'm talking about why don't we have to decolonize our way of thinking? Why do we have always to think like being dictated by foreigners? And here, I'm amazed. Why don't our politicians have paved the way for us? We have the agenda 2063. We have just started the implementation of African Free Trade Agreement just in January. There are so many promising projects. We should believe in that. We should believe in ourselves instead of waiting for the other or playing the role of subcontractor for foreigners. We should be proud of ourselves. We should be proud of our Africanism. That's what we should think in our. We don't need to given a lesson from outside. We have to trust ourselves. We have to be optimistic, but as well as realistic. I don't like to see some people being supported or funded by foreigners, but foreigners, they won't give you money for God's sake. They want to influence you. They want to impact you. This is a new colonization. That's why it is more important to believe in our strength and our force and in our capacity and our ability, and to be proud of ourselves. The 1960s was the independence. Now we have the independence of our spirit, of our way of thinking, and also we have to think realistically for the future of the continent. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Laid. Abdi Fattah, Dr. Abdi Fattah.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I just wanted to give a comment, not asking a question. We can say the civil society organizations, yes, they have a great role in Africa. Particularly, I have an experience
Dr.
in
Habani, technical team. Dr. Habani, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, as we wait for that, Udasi asked the question, how best can they, I suppose, sorry, let me look, says,
Hello?
If we CSOs are dependent on, what strategies, Udasi says, what strategies, approaches can CSO take to address the stereotype against them within government systems and those that are decision-making at the table? How best can the CSOs coordinate amongst themselves? If also the speakers can elaborate on the form of advocacy and monitoring strategies. Sister Stella Sabiti says, are there any lessons to learn from CSOs in the global north? And then Dr. Ibrahim Mohammed says, we see that CSOs are so many and with overlapping responsibilities. We need to find a way to get the maximum out of them. So let me just check again if Dr. Abdullah Fattah is still on. If not,
Hello?
let me see.
Hello?
We've got lined up Sumbaya. Sumbaya. And then we will come back to Dr. Jonas, who had a question, and then the panelists can speak to it. Dr. Sumbaya, or Comrade Sumbaya, or Excellency Sumbaya. And I see that Stella is here as well. Stella, would you like to also ask your question? I have Stella Sabiti on the list, Abdi Fattah, and I thought I had
Yes, hello.
Sumbaya. Please go ahead and ask in any order.
Brian,
Hello?
should I speak now, or am I waiting for someone?
So how this works, you have to click on the request to speak. Once it's there, you have to unmute yourself and speak. Okay, technical team, I'm not sure what's going on, but let me do, yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Stella. Sorry, I'm in a place. Yeah, hi. very fantastic discussion. I worked for many years, more than 10 years in Europe as part of civil society, and we collaborated very well with the government, especially during a very hectic period in the late 80s, and then early 90s. And I saw the collaboration was fantastic. And in fact, where government entities couldn't push maybe agreement in parliament or wherever, they would come to us as civil society and say, please push it as civil society, and then it would go through. There was a very wonderful way of collaboration. I just don't know if we have those best practices to learn from that experience. Thank you.
Thank you,
Brian.
Stella. Sumbaya.
Thank you so much, and I'm really happy that I've come in now after Stella. Because
Abdi Fatah.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Thank you, Brian. Do I have the floor?
Technical team, both the two people I'm calling upon to speak are suggesting that their unmute buttons are not working. Please kindly assist them. And as I wait for them to be assisted, let me ask Dr. Jonas if he's back to make his points. Dr. Jonas?
Yes, can you hear me, Brian? Can you hear me?
Yes, Doc. I'd asked you a question, and then I know that...
What was the question, sir? I was called out, and I'm sorry for that. Could you just repeat the question? I was not here.
Although this is often misattributed, that Howard Core suggested that ideas run the world, and those that have ideas often have no power, and those that have power often have no ideas. Howard used to work for the Clinton administration and teach at... I then altered that and said the genius of Africa is the one who will marry ideas and power. So my question was very simple. In constructing effective CSO government and African Union collaboration in peace and security in Africa, what do you envisage as the role of African intellectuals, academic, researchers, and knowledge institutions, and what can be done to link knowledge to policy and practice, and vice versa, to turn practice into policy? Do those mechanisms exist?
Isn't it at least $1 million question, to be honest, under the circumstances? Brian, thank you for that mind-blowing question. Seriously speaking, I'm absolutely delighted to attempt anyway. Also, I'm very happy about that analogy of power and ideas and power. That's dialectical link in it also is there, because the source of the power must first and foremost be a power. If we're ideas, if we go back to Hegelian argument. So just to hit the nail on the head, as you raised, at IPSS, very concretely, we have a number of practitioners coming from civil societies, and even some of them have got some scholarships as well to be trained at IPSS regarding or relating to peace education, peace building, and most important, conflict transformation. And how can this academia or institutionally as well as individually link back to civil society, because civil society, as we already raised, is a triangle between a state, the state, market, and society. They are there as mediators, not only of change, but also transformation, development as well. So I think intellectuals can engage in it through research, through education, through policy dialogue, and most important, through critical engagement rather than isolating themselves, sitting in ivory tower or being totally untouchable, simply because civil society organizations really go down to grassroots level, deal with what is the meaning of African Union for an individual Senegalese or Ethiopian or South African, just down there. So how to elucidate those concepts that, I'm really expecting the organic link between civil society and academia. And this, of course, at higher level then should feed into African Union level. Luckily, we have with AGA and APSA an excellent relations, and we are almost discussing how to forge both AGA and APSA and IPSS together. Here then the third link comes to civil society coming in, and through writing, through speaking, sometimes acting like advocates as well, not simply activists. So I think there are a lot of loopholes that both can definitely come in and work together. So to my understanding, it is this lack, this not organically, being linked between civil society, institutions, and academia. That very lack was one of the causes of conflicts in Africa, simply because governments coming through coup d'etat or through rebel movement would start development plan without understanding what is the dire need of the society. This dire need of society, the voice of society, comes from academia and from civil society. So their engagement, their coming together, to me, is one of the panaceas, if not all panacea at all. So Brian, that is absolutely important question. Again, I'm just touching upon only sort of iceberg, tip of iceberg. I'm not really going to the deepest one, but I think this coming together, working together is the way out.
So Trufina, Emebet, and Edmund, you had the question about neo-imperialism and having confidence in ourselves from Dr. Layed. Can I just add one small thing and hear your reflections on that question and any of the other questions that have come up? The one thing I wish to add, and please do alert me when Sumbaya is ready.
I think I'm ready. Thank you.
You are ready? Okay.
We're
increasingly hearing about the role. Sue, I'll come to you after. Maybe let me just take Edmund. I was unfair on him. The role of external actors in Sudan, South Sudan, and the whole of Africa, whether these actors are the traditional imperial centers, the United States of America, smaller countries such as Israel, Turkey, the Gulf twins, whether it's Qatar, UAE, or others, and China. As we think through the architecture of conflict as well as peace on the continent, where do you locate the two things? The chastisement by Dr. Layed that we need to believe more in ourselves and not be looking outward to foreigners and therefore enabling neo-imperialism, and the reality of economies and development largely being driven by these other external actors, which sometimes bring politicized religion, at other times they bring agenda, as Dr. Light said. So I will just take a quick Edmund, Emebet, Trufena, I'll come to you after Sumbaya. Edmund and Emebet, would you like to respond?
Is Emebet coming in or should I go?
Come after you.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, my response is that the dynamics of conflict in Africa is changing. As you have said, like the last one is that even the Middle East is now coming into the business of conflict in Africa in terms of they getting their best interest that they want from the continent. You have seen the Middle East coming in. I think for me, civil society, as someone was saying, civil society are many. I think for me, it's really the question of the access. If we can have easy access to our continental body, then we can bring our own solutions to our problem. But what is happening is that our access to our continental issue, to our continental mechanisms are very far, even at national level. At national level, our governments are squeezing us, are giving us and we have some positive governments in the continent that we could have used them as a champions of supporting civil society role because they can speak government to government. But the problem is real access. That's what I'd like to say in terms of the concerns that were raised. But I still beg and I strongly stand on the ground that African civil society is rich and there's a very good best practices in the continent that we can collect them. Maybe the recommendation is how can we get best practices can be shared among the African civil society. Thank you over there.
Thank you, Edmund. Emabet.
Thank you, Brian. I think the question you raised, I'm not sure which one to address, but perhaps I can respond to the stereotype question, which I think is a very important one and kind of is across the board, I would say. I think the main one being, I think the way we address that negative perception on civil society is by, I think, enhancing transparency, openness among civil society. And probably the way we ask governments to be accountable, I think we should also refer back to us as civil society to say, we are accountable, we are, especially in terms of consultation, public engagement, and linking back to the constituency that we work with. And I think that's I think the way we manage or mitigate this perception. Of course, you can't fix that overall because there is this widespread perception on civil society that they, get money, they do this and that. But I think it starts with transparency and being open and accountability as well. And I think this also links back to Stella's question around what kind of lessons we learn from the international NGOs. I think might be a little bit towards the transparency angle, and I think that is important. And in regards to the international experience as well, I think this role of being the interlocutor is something that needs to be explored further. I think this creating the interface between local actors, regional, and I think also bringing the global issues to local issues. And I think that intersection needs to be something to I think work on. And I think also the international NGOs bring that as a plus. I think I don't quite understand the question around neoliberalism. Is that the question? I haven't heard it correctly, but I think if my attempt to respond to that, it would be for civil society, especially the continental civil society, should really focus on probably I think the poor policies, and really kind of focus on social justice and distributive justice. I think that would be the starting point, and see not to be dragged, I would say, in different directions by, for example, the agendas created by foreign governments, and not to be victim of that agenda, but really focus on proper policies and promote those agendas locally, regionally, and also I think continentally. That's what I could say.
Trufena, you'll answer. Let me hear Sumbaya. Sorry, let me just get, I had three people. Sumbaya, Dr. Abane has been on for some time, and Efwa.
Thank you, Brian. You can hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think much of what I would have said has been covered by other colleagues, so I'll just focus on what hasn't. And this goes to maybe the conceptual framing of our discussion around civil society. I think before we are civil society or members of civil society, we are nationals of our respective countries. We are African. So as such, we have several tracks of intervention and contribution available to us. We can actually use the classic insider-outsider framing to make the point that I'm trying to make here. There's an extent to which our civil society contribution is made through our governments as nationals and as Africans. This is classically where we are able to engage and partner collaboratively with our governments. But we know that this is not always possible. But where we are able to work collaboratively with our governments, in such circumstances, this term of African solutions and African resources actually includes our civil society contribution. A lot of the time, it sounds as though we're saying African solutions and African problems means just of governments, but no, it includes that of civil society. The outsider track, which is what we seem to be equating to the civil society contribution, is most visible when we cannot work collaboratively with our government, when we're at odds with our governments. Now, I just really wanted to say, from a conceptual framework, point of view, we need to remember that civil society contribution means both the inside and the outside, and that we shouldn't only look at the contribution that civil society is making outside of the government track as typifying what our contribution is. I hope that was clear, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for those remarks, just reminding us of our duality. Dr. Habane, sorry you have been waiting for so long. If Dr. Habane is ready, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Sorry. Hello?
Is Her Excellency or Comrade or Ms. Efwa Boatema Yakohene ready?
Yes, hello.
Efwa. Okay. If the colleagues are not, if there's a technical challenge, what we will do is allow me to go back to two questions that I had, one relating to the very questions that have been asked about what we've learned or not learned from elsewhere, from history, from our own successes, as well as the opportunities. I will I was going to say I'll start with Trifena. Trifena, you heard my earlier question about external actors and what we do to understand these external actors, to combat or to engage. So literally, I'm looking at this spectrum from what we have discussed, the spectrum between what Sumbaya says we are first and foremost nationals and citizens, and that national space is now shaped, and even the local space, if you look at natural resource extraction, by internal and external actors, some traditional imperial, some new, supposed friends, but all the same. It's generating both localized conflict and internationalized local conflict. So how do we engage that as civil society? What must we do, both in our local, regional, continental, and global incarnation? Trufena? And Achieng, you can do the same question as well.
Thank you, Brian. I still go back to what Edmund said, that we should look towards African solutions to African problems with African money. It's unfortunate or fortunate that most of the money that runs the African
Technical
continent,
team, I'm not sure what's happening with Trufena, and Efwa is also suggesting that she couldn't unmute. Okay. If Trufena is not yet enabled, Achieng, are you enabled?
Hello, Brian. I hope you can hear me, but I'm sorry I did not hear your question. Half of what you said, I only got the part where you asked me to respond.
I'm waiting for Achieng, for Trufena, for Efwa. Edmund, are you ready?
Brian, can you hear me?
Hello, Brian.
Edmund, I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Brian, there's other colleagues, Akina and the rest are struggling. Can we find them? Can the technical team say before I take advantage? I can hear them, but I don't know whether you're hearing them.
No, I wasn't hearing them, but Achieng has just made a grand entrance. Achieng, please go ahead.
Brian, I think Edmund can hear me, but you can't hear me. And likewise, I also did not.
Now I can hear you.
Okay, I was saying that I only caught the part of your question where you asked me to respond. I didn't hear the question itself, so maybe Edmund can go ahead.
Let me repeat the question since I have you online.
Okay, all right.
The idea that what is local in terms of conflict or localized conflict, whether it is the localized conflict that we are seeing in the Gulf of Guinea and in the Sahel, that relates to the impact of climate change, desertification, and livelihood crisis of pastoralists versus non-pastoralists, or what we are seeing as crises in the Great Lakes region, in the Gulf of, in the Lake Chad Basin, and in the Horn, Lake Turkana, and elsewhere in Mozambique, relating to the natural resource extraction. What is increasingly clear is that there are international dimensions or international actors. Some of these were the former colonial powers and interests. Others are traditional imperial interests. But we also have supposedly friends of Africa from the Middle East and from the Southeast, including China et al. How do we as civil society, in our interventions to prevent conflict, in our interventions to transform conflict, engage the transnational actors, and are we prepared for this engagement? Thank you, Achieng.
Brian, this is a rather difficult question that you have asked. I like to think that in the 50 plus years that African countries have been independent, and I speak on average, that by now we would have figured out how to manage the visitors in our home, for lack of a better word. If I might give an analogy, if your father invites his enemy into the house, how do you, his daughter, begin to fight that enemy when it is your father who invited him in? I think a lot of, and not to underplay the power dynamics that continue to prevail, or the geopolitical structures that exist across the world, but I feel as though some of these relationships are by invitation of our governments to our detriment. And yet civil society can play a role by highlighting these interests and these external interferences within the continent. But if our governments continue to allow spaces for external actors to manifest themselves in such a way as they become quote unquote unstoppable, I'm not sure how civil society organizations would be able to effectively push back against such external action. Because inherently governments, by virtue of the doctrine of recognition, are the actors on the table when it comes to international relations. Civil society are we are the watchers, the ones who try to keep our governments accountable. But I don't know if civil society, whether collectively or individually per country, have the political power to be able to deal with the international dimension of conflict beyond highlighting and putting a torch to those interactions.
Thank you, Achieng. Edmund?
Yes, Brian, I would like to pick from what Achieng ended up with. I think in terms of the questions he ended up with, whether civil society have the strength or political power to get there. And also she concluded by saying governments are the actors on the table. I think if I can go practical, I will say a civil society in the continent with the concept we are nationals. Before we speak about our governments, is I think civil society, we can be actors on the table if we take the responsibility to set our own narrative, not to follow the narrative of others. And by setting our own narrative, to what level can we collectively start doing a study on these intercommunal violence that are happening in the continent, the way how you level it? One evidence that I'm trying to track in the continent is becoming clear is that some multinational or transnational actors are start engaging in Africa by militarizing our economy. So the militarized economy, the economy is becoming more militarized. Military is start engaging on economic issues, natural resources, logging, mining, and the only way they can do is to create a military environment where their access to our resources becoming simple. And I think we might have power to go to the table, like a table of intergovernmental linkages, but we have the research strength. If we can research and we publish facts that set our own narrative, somehow can push back and can open for us a windows of engagement. So I think the idea of we need to be Pan-Africans is also we need to start setting an African knowledge of our own. What evidence do we have than somebody who is a visitor, the way House is said, a visitor come to the house and want to tell you what is really the narrative of your house. I think we have the responsibility to set our narrative, and that will take us as actors to the table in whatever Pan-African theory that we want to build up. Thank you over there.
Thank you. I'm really keen to hear Trufena's views.
Can you hear me?
Trufena.
Hello. Yes, can you hear me?
I'm hearing Trufena. Are you hearing him, Bright? Are you hearing her? She's speaking.
No, I'm not. So the problem may be mine. Please go ahead. If everybody else can hear Trufena, let her go ahead.
Trufena, you're allowed to go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I go back to what I support Achieng and Edmund in what they have said, and I am still emphasizing the idea of homegrown solutions, because even what Edmund is talking about, what you're talking about, the inter-ethnic violence that is being funded from the external forces, that can only be solved if the civil society organizations are people-centered, and they emphasize that point, whereby we have to say that security should be people-centered. We use the human rights approach, make it people-centered and context-specific. That way, we will create a cohesive society and transform our countries. The problem we have is the civil society organizations lack funding. And due to lack of funds, they now develop the appetite to bring in foreign masters who come in and then they change tact. Initially, they come in as friends, but change tact and start getting interested in the natural resources that we have. But if we are to stick to our agenda on peace building, then focus it and develop homegrown solutions, the communities who are living in a particular area will solve their own problems, because no external actor will come in and solve the problems in our own homes. That's what my take is. Hello, Brian. Edmond, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Brian.
I can hear you. I couldn't hear Trufena.
Trufena have ended her comments.
That's fine. Colleagues, we have slightly overshot our time. I will do is try and bring us to a landing. And in bringing us to a landing, I wanted to do a few things. The first is to give us some of the highlights. I will start off with some of the last points made by colleagues around deepening the capacity of CSOs to research on the localized conflicts, as well as some of the transnational actors that have militarized African economies, natural resources, mining, logging, and etc. And that this ability to generate knowledge about our local and to generate knowledge beyond Africa that has an impact in Africa, but in particular linking this, as others have said, to policy change. Just to latch onto something that Sumbaya adverted to, that we have a dual identity, which is our identity as nationals and citizens, and therefore able to work collaboratively with our governments. And also because citizenship is not purely just about compliance, our ability to hold our governments to account when they deviate from what Emebet referred to as the shared values around which we must build solidarity. But there is a need for civil society to go beyond the stereotypes or to counter the stereotypes of it being an adjunct of imperial interests, externally driven, with no patriotic focus or interest. This we can do by ensuring that we enhance transparency and accountability, but also connectedness of civil society to the lived realities of everyday women and men and children in Africa. This can be done by adopting pro-poor policies, continuing to work on social and redistributive justice issues, and eschewing or shunning agendas that are driven purely by foreign governments. We also would like to highlight the opportunity that Dr. Jonas referred to between the current work at IPSS that brings on board practitioners from government and civil society, and a partnership with the African Union, AGA, and the Department of Peace and Security now, and how to harvest and enhance this as a true tripartite partnership in conflict transformation and peace building in Africa. We were reminded that the opportunities created by Agenda 2063 and the AFCFTA that we must harness by increasing self-belief, self-reliance, and also strengthening the partnership. There are opportunities that Dr. Rupia referred to in mediation, in negotiation and conciliation for CSOs, and in particular in the implementation of the next 4 years of the African Union Plan to address factors including the intercommunal violence that Edmund referred to. But in addressing conflict, it is useful to pay attention to the specificities of the continental context, and one of them is the growing issue of youth unemployment and the livelihood crisis that have been exacerbated by COVID-19 that face African youth, and therefore lend them as tools or political cannon fodder for politicians during elections or for external interests that militarize, as Edmund suggested. And we must, in thinking about ourselves as citizens and nationals, not forget the critical role and function of Africans in the diaspora and how these can be harnessed to address the various issues within the continuum of peace and security in Africa. And in particular, in thinking about the role of CSOs, going beyond the African Union expanded Peace, Security and Governance Department, we must also engage with the mediation support units in the regional economic communities that presently do not have effective mechanisms for CSO participation. It was noted that there's need to address ECOSOC and ensure that it is accessible and not expensive, especially for community-based organizations. A call was made that African governments must realize that if they continue to deprioritize their own citizens, they do so at their own risk, and that there is a need to return to the values of servant leadership, effective service provisioning, and avoid the degeneracy that we are seeing in our politics. And we were also reminded that solutions do not lie within institutions and mechanisms. Something has to give at the political level. There has to be will and commitment by leadership where the rubber meets the road, we were taught. So core principles, shared values bring us together. Polarization and deep mistrust is based in our inability to build around those core values. And AU therefore must prioritize working with local organizations, listening to the local expertise and wisdom that comes from locals. African solutions to African problems with African money is a key consideration. But we were also reminded that peace and security should have a human rights face and agenda. It must be humanized, taking into account individual, household, community, national, or what is called the bottom-up approach, with civil society as critical cogs in the African peace and security architecture. Reminded that peace is context-specific and must be gender responsive. That cultural leaders in certain contexts hold more power than politicians, and that, however, taking cognizance of the power and impact and import of culture must not be a capitulation from some of the core norms and standards that promote gender equality within the African Union and internationally. That we must not use patriarchy as an excuse for promoting, culture as an excuse for promoting patriarchy or raising systemic barriers to women's participation. Ultimately, as Emebet put it, let's not, as NGOs or INGOs or other forms of civil society, displace local knowledge, local expertise, or forget the value of geographic proximity. That local legitimacy and the leverage of partnership between various levels of civil society. Colleagues, it's been a rich discussion. Many more things than what I have summarized were said. I'm grateful to our host, the IPSS, for creating the opportunity to dialogue about an often forgotten role of civil society in constructing peace, stability, and transformative and inclusive development in Africa. With those words, I'd like to thank our panelists, Emebet, my brother Martin, who's left, Trifena, Achieng, and of course my brother from another mother, Edmund Yakani. And all of you have shared wisdom, Trifena, and those who made interventions, including Sumbaya, Dr. Lyons, and others who made interventions on the floor. Thank you so much. I hand back to Dr. Jonas and our colleague, our host at the IPSS. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate this very, very informative, incisive discussion. Thank you very much. Dr. Jonas. I'm waiting for Dr. Jonas, but if Dr. Jonas is not there yet, I can explain the donkey analogy. Okay, so the idea was that the donkey is tired, meaning that if leadership flogs citizens and is insensitive to the citizens' views, at some stage the citizens become renegades. And Stella, that you had asked the questions, that the hostility of the led to the leadership arises out of the insensitivity and inattentiveness and unresponsiveness of the leadership. Colleagues, Dr. Jonas is gone. I'll not pretend to be the IPSS director, but allow me to thank you, to thank Rubiat, to thank everybody else that's behind this, Letty and your team, the entire leadership at IPSS. Colleagues, have a wonderful Friday. Stay safe, socially distance, wear your mask, sanitize, wash your hands. We will see you at the next dialogue. Have a wonderful day.